AI won't replace physicians, but physicians who use AI will replace those who don't. And I believe that. I think these tools will become standard of care. I think they will become embedded in our practices in ways that we can't even imagine today. And we have to. And the reason we have to is we cannot sustain the system.
Hey everyone, welcome to Leadership Rounds, a podcast shining a spotlight on exceptional clinician executives thriving and driving innovation at the intersection of business and healthcare. I'm your host, Dr. Reena Pande, and together we'll explore the wisdom and insights of great healthcare executives and craft a prescription for leadership success, one candid conversation at a time. Jesse Ehrenfeld, it's such a treat to have you on the podcast with me. It's CMO at Aidoc now, but you've had so many interesting roles across your career. And you may know that this is a little project that I love to do to highlight exceptional clinician executives, and you certainly fit the bill. And I've been this year really trying to get more folks who are on the cutting edge of AI and technology as clinicians, because I think you will agree, we need a lot of great clinician execs at the table as all this innovation in AI is happening. So welcome. Just so grateful to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me. This is going to be a fun chat.
It will indeed. So I will get to like the backstory, but I wanted to start in the present moment. You recently took a new role as Chief Medical Officer at a wonderful company called Aidoc. And I'd love to start with your decision to step into the role. I mean, you've had a career that spans health systems, clinical care, informatics, national leadership with the American Medical Association. And so stepping into this private company operating role might feel like a pivot, but on the other hand, it kind of also seems like the natural progression of a career spent in technology and healthcare. So we'd just love your take on why this, why now?
Well, look, after leading the American Medical Association, being in senior leadership roles at my medical school, Medical College of Wisconsin, the shift for me is about moving from policy to practice, right? National leadership roles, you get to influence the what, but taking an operating role at Aidoc, for me, lets me execute the how. And I spent a lot of time on a lot of stage, talking to a lot of people and a lot of reporters, a lot of media, complaining about companies that did not have the voice of the clinicians driving the products that they're bringing to the marketplace. I spent a lot of time complaining about the burden that bad health IT, bad digital technology creates when it's, painful to use and not an asset to the clinician who is stuck trying to do something at 3 a.m. in the ICU. So for me, this was kind of that natural progression, but it's also a place to kind of put my money where my mouth is. And, I knew about Aidoc for a while. And to be honest, actually, when the CEO called me and asked me to do this, I told him no.
I love that. Say more about that story.
Well, actually, it's a funny story. So he asked if we could do a Zoom, because I'd been advising him for a little bit. And he said, I need to hire a CMO. Can you look at the job description and give me some suggestions and help me edit it to figure out what to look for? And I said, sure, happy to do that. So I spent like 30 minutes redlining this thing. And at the end of it, I said, oh my God, this is like a giant job. Like, what idiot is going to take this? And he goes, you.
I love that.
I said, no, I'll help you recruit. Like, I'll give you suggestions, but like, this isn't really probably the right time for me to do this. And I got home that night and I told my husband, Judd, I said, Judd, I had this funny call with Alot. He tried to hire me and he goes, well, what did you say? I said, no. He said, call him back. Why didn't you say no? And what Judd knew is that in the company, I believed in the approach that they're taking to support clinicians. He knew that I liked a lot and, had very positive interactions and a lot of good things to say about the company. And he liked the rest of the world. And I both know that this is kind of the moment for AI in healthcare.
Yeah.
So I called him back and we talked more and here I am. And I wouldn't just go to work for a company that's got algorithms. They approach this in a way that I really, really believe in as a physician who's still seeing patients who benefits from these tools, right? They've got the regulatory rigor, they've got the clinical discipline that is baked into their DNA. I can't tell you how many times I've been on a call with the head of our product or the co-founders, and they said, look, if we're not absolutely sure that this is safe, we're not going to do it. It is off the table. And that is not, frankly, the vibe of a lot of startups. So, they are clearly, we are a market leader, leading with real outcomes, not just a promise. So I'm excited about it. It's been fun. I'm only 4 months in full time, learned a lot, got a lot more ground to cover. And the deployment is huge. I mean, we're in 19 countries, almost 2,000 hospitals, 100 million patients have been touched by our software. So the scale that they've achieved in a decade is massive. And it's been fun to figure out how I can really drive that.
Yeah. I have so many questions. You mentioned this current moment in AI that your husband was like, hello, like this is the thing you've been working towards for a long time, and we're in a special moment. Just talking more about Aidoc for a minute, and then I want to dig in on your career and how you got from point A to B to C to D to here. But where tell us more about Aidoc, the platform, what the actual product is, and maybe taking it up one notch, just sort of how Aidoc fits into this moment of how AI is being deployed in so many different ways in healthcare right now.
Yeah, so I like to make the distinction between clinical AI, which is where Aidoc is, and I think we're the largest clinical AI company in the world. Nobody's called me out on this or said, we're bigger. I think we are, versus administrative AI. And love or hate ambient scribes, revenue cycle management tools, administrative things that do make life easier for clinicians. That is administrative. Now, a lot of ambient companies want to become clinical, and they're moving that direction, but they're not there today. And they get lumped together in a lot of these conversations. The distinction is important because the risk profile, the relationship with the clinicians, the end users, and the trust model is completely different with clinical AI like Aidoc versus administrative AI. So what do we do? We analyze images. We analyze, hundreds of thousands of CT scans a day.
Wild.
And help triage and flag acute findings. And what does that mean to a patient? It means that at 3 a.m, when you show up in the ED and you've got a sign of a stroke and you go to the CT scanner, as soon as that image hits the server, within a matter of minutes, if there's a bleed or a clot, the care team is getting notified and in many cases activated. And that drops time. We have been able to, at many systems, drop the turnaround time for an acute stroke, for a bleed, 40% of the time, 40% faster somebody is getting care. And when you're shaving 30, 40 minutes off of time to intervention for stroke, you can imagine what that does to every downstream outcome imaginable. Just patient outcomes, but obviously system quality outcomes, length of stay, financial, all those kinds of things. So Aidoc has the most FDA clearances in the space for algorithms that both triage and detect. And we have launched now into foundation model technology, which is kind of a step change function in terms of what we can bring to the marketplace. Foundation models are these multi-purpose clinical grade models that don't just have one algorithm for one indication, but one algorithm, one model for multiple indications. And obviously, that's a game changer. We were able to build in basically 9 months what took us 9 years previously. And so our roadmap has basically covering the body head to toe with most images, in 18 months. And it's really exciting to think about what that means, when I step into the hospital or I take my kid to the hospital, and they need to have images, or I need to work with somebody, a patient who has some sort of acute problem.
I love that. It's interesting to think about the history of Aidoc. I know a lot started the company now many years ago. Well, I mean, over a decade ago, right? And it's like he was one of the early. He and the team were really early in this space, and there has been, step function change in the pace with which you can build and deploy these solutions. I mean, just what's your take on like the pace with which innovation is happening in AI, and how are we keeping up with the technology? How are you guys at Aidoc keeping up with the technology?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenge is as you know, one health system that I know very well, the list of AI tools that they're thinking about, looking and evaluating, piloting, it was like 73.
Wow. Yeah.
Guess what? You can have all the money in the world. No system can deploy, implement 73 tools. We just don't have the resources, the time, the energy. So it's going to be really, really important. Aidoc has a lot of individual algorithms that are point solutions deployed at thousands of places, but we're going to, I think, quickly see this pivot to platform technology, and Aidoc is set up as a platform. One implementation allows a multitude of algorithms, many of which are Aidoc's, but we also have other partners where we bring algorithms onto the platform that systems can choose from, and doesn't matter to them, if it's, ours or another vendor's, because the integration only happened once. It's a huge advantage from an implementation standpoint, and that's how you can get to scale. We just saw this with Mercy Hospital down in, St. Louis, that area. Incredible alignment with our team, their clinical leadership vision, that the degree that we were able to get to scale was massive. And when we first connected with them, like back in September, they wanted to go enterprise-wide in months, not years.
Yeah.
Enterprise-wide.
Amazing.
But February, we were live in 50 facilities, running like more than a dozen use cases, all scaling over 30 days. And this was one of the fastest implementations that we've ever done at scale. And it happened because of that alignment, because of leadership and clinicians and the vendor all really, really coming together to see how could we do this.
It's such an interesting point, because it's the implementation question is not necessarily a technical question at all, right? So I was thinking about the speed with which like technology has actually changed, but this pace of being able to implement is interesting. I wasn't planning to ask you about this, but I'd love your thoughts on say more about that. Like, why was it so successful to get something implemented at that pace? And maybe hiding in my question, it is, how much was it about the need for the solution? How much was it the opportunity as a clinical leader to be in there and help get alignment with the clinical leaders on the other side of the table to appreciate the value of the solution you guys provide?
So look, I think you're right. The algorithms are kind of foundational table stakes. There are a lot of great algorithms out there in the world. Aidoc has very special expertise in integration, deployment, workflow mapping. And we've learned that. That was not a native skill 10 years ago when this company was founded. But we're live in 250 systems. We've done everything wrong that you could possibly imagine. We've got a pretty good playbook, but one thing that's really, really important is the executive sponsorship. And it's really, really important for success to have a real executive at the table who isn't just, the named person at the top of the charter, but is actually showing up and allowing, closed doors to be opened, escalating when appropriate, and being there to demonstrate that this isn't just, a one-off thing that we're doing on the side, but this aligns with the overall strategy for the institution. And the places where we've had the most traction and the most success and the best results, we see that clear alignment between how our tools are being brought to bear and the overall alignment with the institutional strategy. We see that in population health. We see that in quality. We see that obviously at the service line level as well.
So let's talk a little more then about like the clinician involvement, because there's this piece on the implementation side and like sitting at the table with your clinical or other counterparts. I felt like I spent a lot of time talking to CMOs, but also product leaders and business leaders and actuaries and finance people who had to make these decisions. Then there's the role of the clinician, like in the actual development of the product. And you've spoken about this before, about the importance of having clinician involvement. from the earliest stages of design all the way through to this implementation phase we're talking about. So I'd love to spend a little time and unpack that, because I obviously feel very strongly we need clinicians at all phases of this, and we're more than capable of being part of it. But why do you, I mean, where are the places where you see clinician input as invaluable along the process from, A to B to getting a product actually in market?
Yeah, look, I've made this mistake. I have learned this the hard. I built some great software like many years ago, when I was in Boston Mass General, and it was great. Studied it, ran it, launched it. It was live. And then we deployed it to our children's hospital, and I'm like an idiot, thought like, oh, like,
Easy.
it'll work just fine. And it had nothing to do with like the physiology or the medicines or the drugs. It was the workflow was different. I am not a pediatric anesthesiologist. I didn't actually work at our children's hospital, although, one department, all the things, everything, whatever. There were critical nuances that I failed to appreciate, because I was not a clinician doing that work day to day, and it failed miserably. And I got called out on it appropriately. Lesson learned, important lesson, many years ago. And when we go into a system as a company to do the work, to really understand and roll up our sleeves and figure out like, okay, how do we actually make sure that we're not repeating mistakes or just, putting technology on top of a bad workflow if there's an opportunity to optimize. In some systems, they just want to have a digital tool that sits on top of an existing workflow. Other systems say, look, we want to very intentionally rethink, is this the right way to be doing these things? We have a new suite of tools. We have new capabilities. Can we redefine roles, shift tasks? Maybe we don't have to have the neurologist doing this particular piece of the workflow, because that can be moved to a stroke coordinator who's a trained nurse, who's backstopped by, the interventionalist on their app and whatever. So there's lots of different ways that we see this kind of playing out. But it ultimately comes down to having the clinical team. And that's not just the physicians, it's the team who actually driving these workflows at the table with the folks who could do the process engineering and say, okay, these are options, and map those things out, and then ultimately make decisions. And look, we don't always get everything right the first time, and that's why you have to have the willingness to pilot and have champions who are willing to tell you like, this is okay, but it's not perfect. We could do better, and that's where we see these things really work.
Yeah, we haven't talked at all about your experiences as a health system leader. So, training here in Boston, which is where I am. Then at Vandy, and then in Wisconsin, right? So you've seen it from the other side. You've sat in the seat of the folks on the other side of the table. So, I mean, as a health system leader and now on the other side facing health systems leaders, what do you think is the most common mistake that you see C-suite executives make as they're thinking about deploying AI, doing AI?
I think the challenge is a lot of times, what happens in a lot of systems is they buy something, and they deploy it, and then no one's using it, and the outcomes aren't changing, and they don't understand why. I see this a lot, not necessarily in our space, but in a lot of different sort of spaces with different technologies, innovations, and tools. And a lot of times what happens is they bought a one-off point solution without an architecture underneath it.
Okay.
And that's not a failure of judgment at the C-suite or with anybody kind of in that chain. It's what the market sold them. And name that solution. Isolated tools that solve small one-off problems but don't drive system-wide impact is a challenge. And that's where you have to think about, okay, what is the architecture across the system that enables you to kind of get out of this challenge? And we've seen this occur again in now hundreds of health systems, thousands of facilities, where when you've got the right executive level leadership to think, okay, what is the architecture that we need? And we have the budget to do it, and the care delivery authority from the clinicians, and a technology partner who's willing to go deep with the implementation, not just the model. that's when you have real true partnership, and that's what we try to bring forward to all the places that we
Yeah.
work. I mean, we average something like 9 algorithms deployed per health system customer. It's either 9 or 10, which is important because it means that we're supporting a whole bunch of use cases. Right, because the algorithms are all different. They're doing different things, and that means that we can get them out of that pilot purgatory. you know, Mercy 4 months for their pilot before they went enterprise wide. Sutter was less than a year.
Wild.
The average, the average healthcare AI implementation is like a 24-month, stretched out thing, depending on the organization's size and readiness. And the industry, the healthcare industry, we can't do that anymore. We need to go from 12-month to 12-week pilots.
That is wild. I mean, we used to, in my Able2 days, oh my goodness, right. First of all, the sales cycle was 24 months. We were selling to payers. The sales cycle was ridiculously long. And then beyond that, just like what I would think of as something quite simple, like how do you recode your claim system to enable an innovative payment model, was another 6 to 9 months just to code in what I thought is an if-then statement, right? So it is remarkable the pace at which you guys, 4 months is it's just shocking. But I think it speaks to the history and the experience and, having built a playbook by having been in this space for a while. We've talked about systems and workflows, and it strikes me that we haven't talked about your early days and your time in the military. And there's so many we're just going to peel away like the onion and unearth all these fascinating pieces of your history. But I wonder, would love for you to share a little bit about your military experience and how that has contributed to your thinking about systems level approaches, workflows, protocols, in building these new tools in AI and healthcare.
Yeah, well, so I did 10 years in the Navy, loved every minute of it. I got to do a lot of really fun stuff. Like an idiot, I joined the Navy without getting any loan repayment. I just signed up to get a residence. It was one of those things that I kind of wanted to do. I don't come from a military family, but everybody in my family has been in the military.
Okay.
And in fact, I've got an ancestor on my mom's side who was a medical officer under George Washington, believe it or not.
You're kidding. Fascinating.
So this moment, 2008, when I was about to finish residency, that I said, you know what, it's time. So I got a commission and joined the reserves. And anyway, it's all good. I was in for 10 years, deployed. I was in Afghanistan, 14, 15. I also got to do a lot of policy work for the Navy. I led the Navy Surgeon General's digital medicine task force. I co-led it with an incredible cardiothoracic surgeon named Hassan Tedda, who was amazing. We're still in touch. And you learn about leadership. I mean, people talk about military leadership. And certainly as a clinician who was kind of dropped into this organization that was massive, I recognized a couple of things. One is they're really, really good at creating the floor, right? You can dump a whole bunch of 18-year-olds who've never been to college and put them through a process, and you end up with a shared understanding and vision. And I learned a lot about positional leadership. What is positional leadership? Does not matter that I am a commander, 05 with rank, scrambled eggs on my cover. And there's a junior sailor, boatswain's mate, who's driving the dinghy. They have positional authority. They are in charge. I am not. And that's a critical lesson that every military officer learns, that I think a lot of clinicians and health system executives would benefit from learning as well. Just because you have the title doesn't mean that you ought to be making the decision. And just because you don't have the title doesn't mean that you can't exert leadership and authority, because you're the one who's in that workflow at 3 a.m. in the ED, who understands why there's a delay in getting the interventionalist to drive in from wherever to take care of the stroke patient.
Yeah.
So that's something that sort of stuck with me, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to serve our nation. There are also a bunch of guys that are home with their families today that would not have survived if I hadn't been there.
Awesome.
So we're really good about that.
What a gift to give, and and probably to receive, in your experience there. I would love to dig in like one notch further, and I love that perspective just now on when to lead, when to be the voice in the room that's loud, and when to lead by influence, when you have the power and when you have to contribute, even if you don't have the power. As clinician leaders, I think we struggle. I shouldn't say struggle. We had the opportunity to try to sort through that often. I was in an influencer role for many, many years, and then later on only in a position to have, a large team under me and to drive, operational change. But yeah, how would you take those lessons, and what would you say to other clinician executives as they find their way on how to kind of put those lessons to use in our world now?
I think the ability to do that comes from two attributes. One is humility. You don't always have to be the loudest voice in the room. The other is confidence. And, I had a lot of early success in research and advocacy and policy, all of these things. And, do I need to publish another paper, the 360th? Like, no. Am I happy? And this happened last week. Am I happy to, help a colleague? Somebody, called me and said, can you be a co-author and help us get this out
Yeah.
and whatever? And the answer is like, yeah, I could do that in my sleep, and I like doing it. And it's fun. But I said, how about this other colleague who you don't know? Let me introduce you. He'd be great. And it's kind of that element of sponsorship, but it also comes from the confidence that like, I don't need another thing. I don't need whatever in whatever domain to be able to say that now is not the time for me to lead in this activity. I can defer that to another person, give them the opportunity for whatever makes sense for them to have that.
That's great. That's great. I love that. So speaking of clinician leaders in new roles, so let's, I'm meandering a little bit here, but like each thing you say is giving me some idea for the next thing to ask you. So back to the beginning, maybe stepping into this Aidoc role, chief medical officer, maybe tell us a little bit about what that role is for you. Because as I know in my role at Oxfam now, not all chief medical officer roles are the same, and some are more commercially oriented, some are more internal operations, some are more product oriented, right? Would love for you to share just what your specific role is, and then piggyback on that a second question, which is like, well, how did it feel jumping into this entrepreneurial environment, having been the policy side and the system side all those years?
Yeah, so I don't have a commercial role, which is great because I don't like sales. My role is really to be the bridge to our clinicians that are the thousands of existing customers that are using our tools each and every day. But the ecosystem writ large, because we want to continue to refine and iterate and build. And talking about humility, Aidoc and the team and the founders through and through have in their DNA that we know we haven't perfected anything. That there is still more to do. Even an algorithm that's 97.4 median sensitivity, we can get that to 98. We can get that to 98.5. What happens when you have 100 algorithms, but they all have 98, sensitivity, specificity? That's still a whole bunch of false positives and false negatives just because of the scale, right? So for me, it's been that bridge. That's been a lot of fun to connect with colleagues across the ecosystem. I get to do a lot of work with our product team. I get involved with our regulatory compliance efforts as well. Given my love of advocacy, you can imagine there's a lot of conversations in Washington with FDA and CMS and the Hill and the White House about, what is the future state for these tools and how do we enable that through policy, coming at it from a different angle as a vendor. It's been fun. Again, every day is a little different. You never know exactly what you're gonna get. But we're in 19 countries, so I get to hear incredible stories from across the globe. I heard today. Patient went to one of our sites with a fracture, and the resident didn't see it. The ED doc didn't see it. The orthopedic surgeon didn't see it. And our tools and our platform saw it.
Wow.
Now, I don't know the context. Was it a small hairline fracture, hard place to see, whatever. I'm not pointing fingers, but the variability and the gaps are real. And the Hopkins team out of the Armstrong Institute published, I think, last year that there's something like 900,000 diagnostic errors a year. And it's like 400,000 people are seriously harmed or die because of that. That's real. I know that. I make mistakes. When I'm in the OR, and I'm human. And so any tool, any platform that can make me more effective, that can help me see the things that are really, really hard to see, I want it. And it's just been really, really fun to not only help develop, where we're going, but just to hear the incredible enthusiasm for these tools as they're supporting clinical teams all across the globe.
I love it. So tell me then, like, what was hard? So you jump into this new role. It's a new world. It's a venture-backed company. Not an environment you've been in before. What shocked you most? What was hard?
Honestly, I talked about technology going. I mean, it's like the simple things, like going from Office and Exchange to Google and Slack, and I'm like, oh my God, what does this all mean? So they're just some of those communication pathways, learning things that for me, again, working for a global company that's in so many places with so many time zones and so many people, and our U.S. team is primarily remote, so people are kind of scattered all over. It's been a bit of an adjustment, but it's been fun. And again, I said this at the AMA. I think that the people who work at the AMA care more about doctors sometimes than our doctors. And the people who work at Aidoc is the same way. They care so much about the products that we deliver to our teams. It's just incredible. And again, this is a 24/7 operation because our algorithms never sleep. We're always providing care and support across the globe, and the team continues to show up to do that.
Yeah, I love that. Did you personally have to shift your leadership style at all, going from, systems leadership to AMA, like policy level leadership, to now in this brand new environment for you? Have you had to adapt? And if so, in what ways?
I don't think I've had to adapt. I've had to learn just the cultural differences. And I think that when you change organizations, you change roles, even within an organization. And for me, it's a startup. There is a different set of expectations, and different communication pathways. And I've had to sort of really, sort of check sort of my usual approach to dealing with things at the door a little bit, and just learn and understand as a part of a new place. But it's been great, and we'll see where it goes in the next years.
I love it. Last couple of questions for you. I mean, let's talk about career transition decision making, because you've made some interesting. I see the through line, and I think anyone who looks at your career can totally see the through line from clinician. I mean, you've always been clinician. That hasn't gone away. The informatics work, the systems work in the hospitals, the policy work at the AMA, and now on the other side, but implementing. I'd love to hear, and I think our listeners would love to hear, like, how you've made your decisions about career transitions at each of those points. What have been the criteria that you have used to think about how to shift?
So two things I'll share with your listeners here, or your viewers, or whatever. One is, I, like many physicians, am very type A driven personality.
Welcome to the club.
We've got it all mapped out. Right. And we had it mapped out in 7th grade, like what we were going to do. So it has taken me a very long time to be comfortable with the uncertainty of what's ahead.
Yeah.
And that is not how I am wired, but I have had to get there. And that also just helps me, frankly, in the startup environment in a different kind of way. But that's a really important sort of just thing that I've had to realize that, based on my personality, because I never would have imagined, 5 years ago that I would be in this current role. So that's number one. The second thing is I do this exercise with actually all my residents. This is fun. I have them. I basically lock them in a room as a part of like a career development exercise.
So
and I give them an actual piece of paper and an actual writing instrument, and I make them create a 3x2 table, and I have them do short-term, long-term at the top, and then I have them do personal goals, professional goals, and financial goals down the side. And I make them actually sit there in silence for 15 minutes to fill it out.
I love that.
And I do this at least twice a year, and I've done it for 15 years because one of my mentors told me you should do this. And it's not like it changes every month, all these things, but to pause and to reflect and to be intentional about where you are going is so critical to success. Because I see a lot of, students and trainees and junior colleagues sort of float through life. Like, the obvious thing is, well, I'm going to med school and then residency and then fellowship and then my first job, without really stepping back and saying, what is the end game? And that end game can change, or we may not know what that is, and that's okay too. But I don't want anyone to miss out on acquiring a skill or creating a connection because they weren't taking that 15 minutes to just step back and go, okay, where am I trying to drive the ship to?
Yeah, I love that. Intentional or intentionality is my word or phrase for the year. It's so easy to get wrapped up in get on the train and just go to wherever, the train takes you to whatever station. But actually choosing the path is a completely different matter, right? And it takes space and time. I love the exercise that you're describing you do with your teams. It's so powerful. And too few people actually ever stop and pause and pick their heads up and think about it. A last question or two. So we're in this moment, like we're in this crazy AI moment, right? If you had a crystal ball, like, what do you see coming? I mean, the slope has been so steep. It feels like it's continuing on. What's the thing we're going to say in 5 or 10 or 20 years? Can you believe it?
Yeah. So the thing that I've said and been quoted, and in fact, this is so funny. My niece was a first-year medical student this year, and she sent me a text of me being quoted on a flight in her first week of med school.
That's awesome.
I love it. And the quote was that AI won't replace physicians, but physicians who use AI will replace those who don't. And I believe that. I think these tools will become standard of care. I think they will become embedded in our practices in ways that we can't even imagine today. And we have to. And the reason we have to is we cannot sustain the system. We all know the unbelievable stress that our teams are under. We all know the tremendous access challenges. We could double medical school enrollment tomorrow. We could triple nursing school enrollment. We still would not solve the problem. We have to re-engineer the pathways and the care teams and how these tools are delivering care. And the only way to do that is to have effective digital tools across the entire ecosystem, across specialties, across systems that work. So we need not just Aidoc to be successful, but we need companies in this space to be successful so that we can 10x what your primary care doctor can do. So we can double, what the, ophthalmologist can do. That's the only way that we're going to have a system that actually can be stabilized and ultimately can take care of my kids when I'm not around.
It's actually probably a perfect place to end. It's a combo of clinician plus AI that you're describing is going to be the future, and I couldn't agree more. I think that's spot on. So, Jesse Ehrenfeld, thank you so much for spending some time with me here to talk about your fascinating career path and the work you're doing now at Aidoc, and wishing for your success here and in whatever next interesting step on your path you take. So, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Leadership Rounds, where clinician executives share wisdom and insights on what it means to be an exceptional leader in healthcare. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please subscribe, comment, and share with your friends and fellow leaders in healthcare. Join us next time for another dose of leadership wisdom. Until then, I'm Dr. Reena Pande. Thanks for listening.